Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Toronto jazz drummer and composer Robert Diack. He spoke with us about his latest album called Lost Villages. He's been composing for many years, and his influences come from jazz to post-bop to folk to traditional to post-rock and even to pop music. He has recorded 2 indie pop albums, large-scale informal releases with the musical collective Luscar, and he even has an upcoming folk rock album that he's collaborated on. And this is in addition to work on his own as a solo jazz cat. He's got great insights, so please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out for me today. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course.
Let's go ahead and hop right in here, and let me ask you about your latest CD, Lost Villages. Talk to me a little bit about this project.
Well, this project started about 2 years ago when I was writing a lot of music, and I was just interested in exploring just the nicer side of jazz music. I wanted to write kind of pretty music, and I wanted to write really pleasant sounding music, and jazz is known a lot for its complications and its like overabundance of difficult music, especially contemporary jazz. I just wanted to write something in response to that. So in doing that, I've been writing a lot of music, and that's where this album was born.
Wonderful. You've got a very unique sound. There's an edge to your sound that I don't hear that often. Talk to me about what has contributed to the sound that you have today.
Well, I really like a lot of post-rock music, and I like listening to edgier music as well. So like I said, I wanted to combine that pretty music, but I also want to give it like a bit of an edge. So if you know post-rock bands, they are known for like repetition in long form. And I wanted to try and translate some of that idea into the jazz medium.
Wonderful. Talk to me about your childhood in Toronto. How did you get so involved, not only in music, but in jazz?
Well, so growing up in Toronto, there's a pretty active scene here. It's a really great place to be and to be practicing music. I first started when I was really young, about 6 years old. My dad had a drum set. He was a drummer for a long time, and I guess that was it for me. You know, growing up with a drum set, you don't really get much chance to choose anything else. And I loved it immediately, so it's all I've ever wanted to do. From there, I started studying at various institutions. I studied classically. I studied jazz music. I just sort of wanted to find that next level and always getting better. And jazz is the idiom that has no ceiling, really. It's as whatever you want it to be. So I was really attracted to that element of it. And in that way, I found myself there. From there, I studied at like university, and I learned a lot there. And I studied with my teacher, Nick Fraser, and he's just absolutely brilliant, and I've learned a lot from him.
What about early jazz albums that were really influential on you?
Well, so the complete Live at the Plug Nickel, do you know that Miles one? It's like very early Miles quintet, and that absolutely blew me away. Just Tony Williams playing on that is just, it's incredible. It's something else. Even still, like 40, 50 years later, it's ahead of its time in such a way that's just breathtaking. The way he plays all of that stuff is just so amazing, and the ride cymbal concepts, just as simple as he breaks it down. Sometimes he's just not playing anything but the ride cymbal, and it's just for huge periods of time on that record, and it's incredible what he can do just with one thing.
So you touched on higher education, and I want to ask about mentors. What advice have you been given through educational venues that have really stuck with you and helped you quite a bit in your career?
Yeah, great question. Foremost is just belief in oneself, like I can do what I want to do. It's difficult to put your name on a project and put it out there, I've found at least. And it's sort of an alarming project to start, if you understand. By these people encouraging me and believing in me and actually taking the time out to seek me out and to help me and to give me the skills that I can actually use to make these projects, I have found just such a tremendous amount of strength and belief in myself in order to put these projects out. So my teachers, all of whom are just fantastic, really helped me out in a lot of ways.
So let me ask you this. As someone that's very immersed in the modern jazz culture. You got a jazz education. How healthy is jazz in the world here in 2018?
I was checking out your podcast, and I heard you ask Peter Erskine that one too, and his answers were really great. It's complicated. So jazz is as healthy as it's ever been. I think the players now are just absolutely fantastic. Some of the people I play with and some of the people I've met in New York are just incredible, just absolutely amazing players. I would say jazz is very healthy. However, I think the organic scene has kind of dissipated. I think it exists mostly in post-secondary institutions, which is fine because it still exists and people are still finding each other. But it's a lot more difficult now to just organically enter the scene and become, jazz superstar without knowing everybody, because it seems a little bit insular, right? Either you know everybody or you don't know everybody, and either you're somebody or you're essentially not.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of the refreshing thing about the jazz community is that there's not necessarily a push for superstardom, but it's more centered on the craft and being humble and just making the best music you can make. Not that other genres aren't, but it seems in jazz that seems to be kind of the cornerstone.
Yeah, especially, so jazz is such a skill-based idiom that either you're good at it or you're not, and that's very apparent in the first couple of seconds when somebody sits down to play. And because of that, it's really easy to get a feel for just the universal language that is jazz, right? So there'll be people who come and they sit down and they play, and it's a baseline that everybody can work off of as well. Just this music is really it's communicative. It's a very communicative language. So I'd say jazz is in a very healthy place, and I think it's going a lot of places. I think the experimenting that's happening right now is just incredible. I think this wave of music that's happening right now is just really experimental, and there's a lot of really cool things coming out, like in the past 10, 15 years that I would say that the 90s had a lot of trouble, whereas now there's a lot of exploration going on. People are not being safe at all in their musical exploration, and it's absolutely fantastic that people are willing to try all this stuff.
So when you look on your career and you think about everything that's happened, what do you think has been some of the biggest moments for you, growth-wise and just career-wise for you?
Yeah, I'm still young, so I'm still working on it. I think the biggest one was this past year. I went down to New York, and I was just trying to write a whole new album. So, yes, I'm releasing this one in, I guess, 2 weeks now. But I'm also booked to record yet another one just 2 months from now. So I've already got a huge amount of material. So I think obviously releasing this album is a huge cornerstone for me. But I think having the amount of material to just get started on another one immediately off of the jump is a huge deal for me.
So let me ask you this. As far as live jazz shows are concerned, what have you seen that's left a really big impression on you?
I recently saw Dan Weiss's ensemble. He's a drummer. He's in New York. Just the guy's concept is absolutely staggering. The way he plays is unlike any other drummer on the scene right now. He's so articulate, I would say. It's just kind of beyond what you would expect. His sound is really unique in that it's a lot more jagged. There are a lot of edges, and there are a lot of really dry sounds in his playing that most jazz drummers, tend to avoid. They put rivets in the cymbals. Everything's really wet, but the way he plays is just absolutely astonishing. It's just very cool. He's got a large ensemble and he's got a small ensemble, and I've seen quite a few of his shows, and they're just all really quite incredible. I think he's got a new record coming out soon as well.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back and see anybody in the history of jazz, who would you go see? Where were you going to go?
Oh, I talked about Tony Williams earlier, and it always comes back to Tony. So I would go see Tony Williams. I would just, I would do nothing else if I could see him. Just watch him all day, every day, nonstop. I would love to see Tony in the 60s. Just what he's doing was so far ahead of what people are doing even now. He's just so talented, and I have nothing but a huge amount of love and respect for his playing.
Right on. So you've dedicated your life to jazz. You clearly love it. So tell me, why do you love jazz?
If you take a look at my album, right, it's pretty flexible in terms of what it would be defined as. It doesn't really fit into one shoebox, and I think that's what is so attractive about jazz is it gives everybody the space to have their own shoebox and make their own ideas and make their own voice heard. Right? Jazz is undying and completely flexible. You can do whatever you want to it, and I guess the question is whether or not that would be accepted, but as long as it's accepted by you, it's a valid statement in the jazz world. And I think that's what I love about jazz so much, just personal acceptance as well as unified acceptance on the scene, right? So if you go out and you make a bold statement and you try your best, people will really respond to that. And they always have, it feels like for me especially, that whenever I try my best in this world, people really respond to that. And there are so many other people who are just trying their best and working really, really hard at trying to make something nice and trying to make something good for this world. And I think jazz is really flexible in that it allows you to do that how you want. And there are a number of other high-performing musical idioms that sort of force you into the conceived ways, the preconceived notions of how it's supposed to proceed. Whereas I found with jazz, it can be whatever you want, right? So this record has country influences, this record has post-rock influences, this record obviously has jazz influences. And it's got a lot of modern classical influences as well. And I find it to have been accepted, and people are starting to seem like they're digging it, which is really interesting. Just in that it comes from such a wide swath of ideation.
So what's your future look like? How do you see things developing as you move forward, say a year, 5, 10 years from now?
I believe my future will look like I'm going to try and put out as many records in as short amount of time as I possibly can. I want to try and be as prolific as I possibly can be in the next 5 years. I want to put out like 2 at least more records if I can get that much material out. I'm already set to record a whole second album, and I'm looking to try and release that before 2019. I don't know how likely that'll be, but I'd like to do that.
So what I want to know is this. Everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, those that get your music, but you're guiding this whole operation for yourself. So tell me, who do you think you are?
That's an unexpectedly complicated question. I think that I wear many hats. I do as many different things as possible. I think that foremost, I am a musician. That's how I would define myself. In that, I kind of have split into 2 veins. I'm a composer as well as a drummer. I've always thought of myself as a drummer for my whole life, as long as I could, conceive a sense of self. It was also tied into that of being a drummer. However, recently, in the past 2 years, I've really started taking a huge interest in composition and in just shaping musical moments as much as I can, and doing so outside of the drum set. And I found a distinct joy in doing that. So I would say that those 2 things have started competing for my attention. However, I mean, every single day I sit behind the drum set and it's like nothing else. It's what I want to be doing still. So I would still say that I'm a drummer. Aside from that, I'm just somebody who really loves music, and I'm somebody who really wants to paint with music and wants to share my musical ideas with the world. I think that's who I am.
Perfect. Robert, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about the new album and about your life view, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Toronto, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Robert for his time, his music, and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.